Thrash metal is probably the most influential subgenre in extreme metal. It is characterized by fast rhythms, complex riffs, occasional palm muting, blistering shredding, and quite technical guitar techniques such as sweep picking, alternate picking, string skipping, and the use of tremolo picking and two-hand tapping. Drums take inspiration from early punk rock, which is the use of skank beats, along with double kick bass drums. Thrash metal vocals mainly focuses on screams and shouts, others opting for a more melodic heavy metal style vocal, while some do alternate between both vocal styles. The influence of thrash metal came from those before as early as Queen with the songs Stone Cold Crazy and Black Sabbath with Symptom of the Universe. Also, the Diamond Head song Am I Evil? These could be seen as the first traces of thrash metal, as well as new wave of British heavy metal acts such as Iron Maiden, Raven, and Angel Witch. It's probably where thrash metal got its more technical approach. Motorhead and Venom, who played speed metal, also influenced the genre when it comes to actual tempos. I also think lyrically, Venom had an influence, as well as hardcore punk bands such as the Misfits and Discharge, to name a few, which is where the D beat drumming style comes from, which is common in thrash metal. Lyrically, thrash metal focuses on anti political themes, warfare, injustice, Satanism, death, and isolation. A band called Leather Charm formed in 1981, which was merely a high school act, having influences of new wave British heavy metal. They played covers of Diamond Head, Sweet Savage, and Iron Maiden. They soon, however, disbanded, and vocalist of Leather Charm, who would be joined by Lars Ulrich to form Metallica in 1981, along with Kirk Hammett and Cliff Burton. They released two demo tapes in 82 and in 1983 released their debut full-length Kill 'Em All, which featured the original Leather Charm song Hit the Lights as the opening track. That same year, Slayer released their spine-chilling debut Show No Mercy. The following year, we see Anthrax with their debut Fistful of Metal in 1984. That was the time that legendary journalist Malcolm Dome invented the genre named thrash metal when writing about the Anthrax song called Metal Thrashing Mad. He also released his first book in 1981 called Encyclopedia Metallica. This is the same year Metallica was formed. So, did they get their name from Malcolm's book? Or was it as stated by Lars Ulrich, drummer of Metallica, where he said he spoke to a friend who was in the beginning stages of creating a fanzine where he would write about all his favorite bands. He asked the opinion of Lars if he should call the fanzine Metal Mania or Metallica. Lars suggested he use Metal Mania as he wanted Metallica for himself, and so Metallica got their band name. In 1985, Megadeth releases their debut full length, Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. The guitar work by Chris Poland and Dave Mustaine was complex and fast, a huge joy for guitar fans, and yeah, thrash metal took another step forward. Despite Dave Mustaine being kicked from Metallica 2 years prior to this, at this time, Mustaine said he was out for blood, and with that saying, wrote the intense and complex guitar work for the Megadeth debut. It was about this time that thrash metal bands started playing even faster and with more complexity. Here we see the importance of Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, and Megadeth, which was known as the Big Four. Why were they called the Big Four when there were other bands at the time who contributed so much to thrash metal in terms of speed, structure, complexity, and lyrics? Well, the simple answer for that is due to the influence of the media. It is where the name comes from and could possibly be the reason why the Big Four sold so many records, gaining so much success and followers. Not to say that the Big Four weren't good, they were damn good. It was the fact that there were potentially other bands who could have benefited from this exposure, but that's besides the point. Just some food for thought. Metallica released their second album in 1984, Ride the Lightning, this time experimenting with slower and more melodic songs, especially on Fade to Black, with his beautiful, clean introduction melody. And here we get a taste of what Metallica would actually do in the future, as they typically wrote more songs like this. One on And Justice for All, Welcome Home Sanitarium on Master of Puppets, which was released in 86 and adored by many fans around the world, hailing it as their best work. In 1985, Slayer releases Hell Awaits and have become even more dark lyrically as well as musically. The following year sees them release Rain in Blood, which to many is the definitive Slayer. Classics such as Angel of Death and Raining Blood. Personally, I think Hell Awaits was the superior release, although both albums are essential in my opinion. Anthrax released Spreading the Disease in 85 and in 1987 Among the Living, with its melodies and fast breakdowns and of course groovy chugs. Every song on here sounds like an anthem with that hardcore punk attitude and Scott Ian's memorable riffs. Megadeth in 1986 dropped Peace Sells, but who's buying? Here they present yet another masterpiece filled with speed, insane complex guitar structures. The bass on this album is also really well executed, ripping solos to melt your face. Now, 1986 to many is seen as the year of thrash. With that being said, it is also possible to say that between 86 and 87 was when thrash metal reached its peak. Not to say that it died, it just reached the peak. There were albums that came after this which are exceptional. Metallica had their last thrash metal album in 88, And Justice for All, after which they steered away from the genre, going for a more straightforward style of metal. Not long after that, they experimented with alternative metal before returning to thrash metal. Slayer too experimented with more mid-paced songs, which could be seen as groove metal, the genre which is possibly the son of thrash metal. I'll discuss it a bit later on. Anthrax continued with melodic thrash metal. State of Euphoria was released in 1988. Megadeth released the amazing Rust in Peace in 1990. Now, before we move on, let's discuss the Bay Area thrash scene, which is what the aforementioned is based on, and basically the formation of thrash metal. The Bay Area was in San Francisco, California, and was on the West Coast, which included acts such as the previously mentioned Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, also Exodus, Metal Church, Suicidal Tendencies, Death Angel, Possessed, and Dark Angel. On the East Coast, which was in New York, gave birth to bands such as Anthrax, Overkill, Nuclear Assault, Carnivore, Mean Streak, Prong, and Toxic. Other parts of the USA had bands such as Nasty Savage, Verbal Abuse. Although being part of the hardcore punk scene, they later flirted with crossover thrash. Now let's discuss crossover thrash. What is it? It was the marriage or fusion between thrash metal and hardcore punk, which was a natural step as thrash metal itself already has been influenced by hardcore punk. Crossover bands, however, had a more open influence in terms of the vocal style being more of hardcore punk shouts, etc. The recordings also sounded more sloppy compared to that of pure thrash, yet the riff structures of thrash metal are still present. A few examples of crossover thrash would be Suicidal Tendencies, SOD, which was the acronym for Stormtroopers of Death. They featured members of Anthrax, which included the legendary Scott Ian on guitar. More bands would be DRI, Carnivore, and Cro-Mags. Let's head over to Germany with the Teutonic thrash metal scene. The name Teutonic comes from the old Germanic tribe called the Teutons. Most of the scene was located in Western Germany. Most of the aspiring bands were working in industrial areas, especially where coal mines were situated. So the working conditions was loud, tough, and dirty, which could be the reason these bands had that energy and natural instinct to be loud, tough, and dirty in their musical representation. Sodom released their EP in 1982 titled Witching Metal. This is also what they called their style of music long before they heard the term thrash metal. While this release was a low budget demo, which meant it was a bit rough around the edges, but it was the start of what was to come. More essential demos from the Teutonic thrash metal scene would be Tormentor, which would later be Creator, End of the World, Samhain with Eternal Death, Assassin with the Saga of Nemesis, Darkness with The Evil Curse, Outrage with From Nightmare to Myths, Destruction with Bestial Invasion of Hell, and Poison with Sons of Evil. The above mentioned Samhain would soon change their name to Death Row. In 1986, they released their debut full length titled Satan's Gift. Holy Moses released the EP Satan's Angel in 82 and could probably be seen as the most early influence for the Teutonic thrash scene, as well as Destruction with Sentence of Death in 84, then the following year with the mighty debut Infernal Overkill, and in 86 Eternal Devastation. Sodom released the EP in The Sign of Evil in 85. The following year, the debut dropped Obsessed by Cruelty and The Crushing Persecution Mania in 87. Creator with Endless Pain and Pleasure to Kill in 1985 and 86 respectively. Tankard with Zombie Attack 86 and Chemical Invasion 87. So, Sodom, Destruction, Creator, and Tankard are often called the Teutonic Big Four by fans, as many see them as the essential German thrash metal bands. But we won't forget that this scene was actually quite huge. As I have mentioned a few acts, I'll mention a few more, which includes Angel Dust, Disaster, Paradox, Iron Angel, Exhumer, Living Death, Necronomicon, Minotaur, Protector, and Vendetta. A huge thrash metal scene which seemed darker and more aggressive also emerged in South America. I think most would be familiar with Brazil. Let's dive into Brazil for a moment. Volcano. Possibly the first extreme metal band from this region. The thrash metal that they played was a bit more stripped down compared to that of the USA and Germany, slightly less technical. It was also more raw and extremely energetic, which gave it a darker aesthetic. Their debut album, released in 1986, called Bloody Vengeance, is proof of this fact. Sepultura, formed by brothers Max and Igor Cavalera, is another band who had this particular style, although if you look at Sepultura today, it seems implausible but there was a time that they had an extreme approach, especially on the split release with Overdose in 1984. The Sepultura side, called Bestial Devastation, was heavy yet sometimes groovy, but not letting up when it comes to creating a heavy and chaotic atmosphere. The debut full length in 1986 called Morbid Visions is also a showcase of the extreme thrash metal side. Other bands from this scene would be the mighty Holocausto with their debut full length Campo de Exterminio, also including Necromancer, although they only had demos in the late 80s through to the 90s and only got their first full length in 2014. More examples from this scene would be MX, Mutilator, Sex Trash, Exterminio. Sarcophago dropped Inri in 1987 and is seen as one of the most influential from this scene. This blasphemous record was something to behold. If you were to throw early Venom, Slayer, and Sodom into a blender, the result would be Sarcophago. Other parts of South America also had influential thrash metal bands. Uruguay had Angkor Wat, Chile had Pentagram, which would later be called Pentagram Chile. Moving over to the United Kingdom, notable thrash metal bands spawned from this region who are definitely worthy of mention. Onslaught, with a hybrid of thrash metal and hardcore punk, particularly D beats. The demo, which was the length of an album, released in 1984, and the official debut full length the following year called Power from Hell. Sabat with the mighty debut in 88 called History of a Time to Come. Switzerland had three notable acts. We're all familiar with Hellhammer, with a almost black thrash approach with lyrics focused on destruction, death, and Satan. Celtic Frost, which featured then called Satanic Slaughter, who goes by the more recognizable name Tom G. Warrior, as well as the late Martin Ein. The EP in 84 called Morbid Tales, it was a slightly different kind of thrash metal with inspiration of other thrash metal across the world. Also Venom and traditional heavy metal influences such as Black Sabbath and even Judas Priest. In 1984, they built on this with their debut full length To Megatherion. Coroner were another band from this region who had a more technical style of thrash metal as compared to the previous two mentioned. The debut full length RIP and follow up Punishment for Decadence were evident of this approach to the style of music. Sweden had Nibelheim, who had a very evil sounding thrash with black metal elements. More bands from there would be Tribulation, not to be confused with the gothic metal band. Also Skull, who had a hardcore style of thrash, only releasing one demo, and another band would be Guillotine. The peak of thrash metal was reached in 1987. During this time, it has influenced so many extreme metal genres, and as a whole, thrash metal could possibly be seen as the most influential in this aspect and very important genre for extreme metal. If it wasn't for these and many others who had the spark and intention of pushing metal to more intense heights, taking the speed of hardcore punk, to think that in those early days, punks and metalheads hated each other, but what was to come was unimaginable. How these two have influenced each other in growing their respective genres. So punk is very important to metal, but we will take that journey through punk eventually. Back to thrash metal. If you watch the black and death metal origin documentaries, you'll see the importance of thrash metal. Most extreme metal has elements of thrash metal. Even modern bands Thrash metal itself stands tall to this day, with many of the older bands still being around. Some may have taken a different approach towards the genre. There are those that became something completely other than thrash metal. Some modern examples in the genre would be bands such as Witchtrap and Vector, just to name a few. So, do you see the importance of the genre? Besides that, there is something else which stemmed from thrash metal, and that is groove metal. Now, it was evident that thrash metal bands already had these elements, but an entire genre was built around possibly 1989. What is it though? Groove metal placed emphasis on the mid tempos and riffs, which were found in thrash metal. The difference was down tuned guitars and the focus on syncopated rhythms, opting for heaviness instead of speed. Vocals had a more raspy type of singing and screaming. The White Zombie EP in 1989, called God of Thunder, had traces of this, but it wasn't until 1990 where the genre truly got defined. Pantera, who were previously a glam metal outfit, they gravitated towards this groove metal sound with the release of Cowboys from Hell in 1990. Their memorable riff from the title track is so infectious and can get stuck in your head for days. In 1992, they released Vulgar Display of Power, which featured the anthem Walk. This was the album that made them even more popular. Prong was another band who were first a crossover act. 1990, they dropped Beg to Differ, also opting for a more groovy style. Soon, many bands showed up to the scene of groove metal. Acts such as White Zombie, which was previously mentioned, also later saw Skin Lab and Machine Head. They also seemed to be a natural shift for some thrash metal bands to adopt this style. Bands such as Sepultura, Demolition Hammer, even Anthrax and Slayer would also flirt with this style, incorporating those heavy grooves. A modern example would be Lamb of God. And with that, we conclude the journey through thrash metal with a touch on groove metal. Thank you all for watching. See you next time.